Hi guys, this is Tekken57 and today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to import meshes from other games into WWE 2K19. For today's tutorial I'm going to be focusing on importing Jeff Jarrett's TNA impact model into a 2K19 model. Okay, so the model that I'm going to be using as a base is Mojo Rawley. And the reason why I've chosen this model is because he has pretty much all the attire parts that I need for Jeff Jarrett. He has the trunks, knee pads and boots, which are very similar to Jeff Jarrett's. So for the purpose of the tutorial, you will see that we need to make a copy of the main wrestler Y-object file. The first instance of the wrestler Y-object file will contain the mesh for the head, and the second instance of the wrestler Y-object file will contain the meshes for the arms, the torso, if you want to import legs, etc. This is the reason why it's important to find a model which has pretty much all the attire parts that you want, because you will already be using two Y-object files to try and import the body parts and the head of the mesh that you are trying to do. If you need to add attire, then you will need to add a third Y-object file, and sometimes the game doesn't load the files due to the file sizes. Alright, so some users have asked me to try and break down the steps for actually creating texture archives and the back archives as well. So I'm going to do this in X-Packer and show you step by step how to do this as well. Alright, so the first step is that I've prepared all of the textures which I will need for the mod, and I have put these in a folder called 000A. So I'm going to select this folder. I'm going to go into X-Packer and I'm going to hit Control N, and I'm going to select the textures in this folder. Okay, I'm going to click the Create Texture Archive button and I'm going to give it a name of 000A. Alright, this will prepare a 000A archive for you. You will also need to do the same for 000C archive, which contains the head, all color and head underscore F textures. Okay, I'm not going to do that for the tutorial. The process is pretty much the same. Alright. Secondly, I have extracted all of Mojo Rawley's files from his pack archive into a folder called Extracted. So I'm going to copy this 000A into the extracted folder. Alright, and you can see I've already prepared a 000C archive as well. If the wrestler has an external TX texture file archive, you will notice that it has a 0014 file in the files which are extracted, so you need to delete this. Alright, and it also has a 25E4 file which controls the movement of the wrestler model. This must also be deleted. Alright, so now I have all the files from Mojo Rawley's pack file extracted. Now I need to create a new package archive which is going to house these files. But before that, I'm actually going to make a duplicate of the main wrestler Y-object file. So I'm just going to open this, as you can see. Okay, so we're going to have two of these files to hold the meshes from the model that we're going to import. Alright, so the first is going to do just the head object. So we're going to use object 0 to import the head from the TNA impact model. And then the second Y-object file is going to import the chest and the arms. Alright, so I'm going to make a duplicate of this file. I'm going to call this 001A. Okay, you can call it anything you want. 001A usually works, 001B, 5607, 5608, 5609, etc. also work as well. Alright, so in the main wrestler Y-object file, I'm going to remove all of the attire parts completely, just for now. Just to see that the mod works in game. You'll notice sometimes that the tire parts in the remainder Y object also causes a few glitches with the models that are being imported. So I always like to start with a model which doesn't have any attire objects, and then slowly add the attire objects back as required, and then you can see if any of these objects are causing any weird glitches with the import that you've done. Alright, also importantly, if the model has a beard object, you should leave the beard object in for now, because sometimes removing the beard object causes the game to crash. You can make the combinations _n texture have an alpha channel which is completely black, so that the beard object doesn't display. The beard objects usually don't work with the meshes that we import, because it's dependent on the 00E6 file, which controls the shape of the beard object. You can remove the 00E6 file from your archive when creating the pack archive, because we don't really need to apply the shaping of the beard object to the face for this tutorial. Alright, the second Y object that I'm going to work with is the 001A, which we've just created. Okay, now from here we need to select 3 meshes which have a polygon count which is fairly similar to the objects that we're going to be importing. So for instance, if I open the main Y object file, you'll notice that the chest has 1735 vertices, the arms have 860 each. So I'm going to be importing these meshes. So I'm going to try and find something which has something fairly close to that. Alright, and if you look, his tights has 1296, it's about 400 or 500 vertices off. His left knee pad and his right knee pad have 609 and 612, which is about 200 vertices off from the arm objects. These will work fine. You can also select objects which have a higher vertex count, and then the meshes which you're importing can have more detail, but it's up to you. I'm not certain if this causes any kind of lag in the game, but I've tested this on a few models where the vertex count is higher than 1735 for the chest, and I don't seem to have any problems so far. Alright, but for this tutorial we're going to be using these 3. Alright, so I'm going to swap positions with object, and I'm going to place this at the top. So I'm going to make this 0. One. 2. Alright, so the first object is going to be the chest, second are going to be arms, and third is also going to be arms. Alright, you also want to try and find an object which has the same weight count as the original objects. Now if you look at the main Y object file, you'll notice that objects like the head, etc., I'll just open the head object, have a weight count of 7. Alright, so you want to find meshes which also have a weight count of 7. So in this instance, our first 3 meshes have a weight count of 7 as well. If your objects do not have a weight count of 7, then you're going to need to change the weight offset of this object to the weight offset of an object which has 7 weights, and also change the weight count. That's fairly complex to do. You need to do that in the hex editor, and I think I will actually code a function for this in an upcoming version of X-Ray. But for now, try and find something that has 7 weights per bone, and use those meshes so that the import is fairly simple to do. Alright, so we've got the first 3 objects prepped. Now what I'm also going to do is that I'm going to copy the shader parameters from the chest and arm objects in the secondary Y object file. This is so that it will load the correct texture, which is all _color _n _mr, etc. For these objects, and it will also take the parameters which are used for the skin objects in this Y object file, so that it will look similar to the skin object that we have in the other Y object file. So the way to do this is I'm going to select the chest object first, and I'm going to say edit parameter offset. I'm going to click the copy button. Also take note of the number of parameters. This has 84 parameters. So I'm going to go into edit parameter offset for the first object there. I'm going to make it the same as the one I've just copied, and we're also going to make that 84. Okay, the second object is going to be the arm object. So I'm going to do the same here. Also make that 84. Okay, and this is going to be the other arm object, so I'm going to copy this parameter offset as well. And I'm going to make this 84. Alright, we don't need any of the other objects for now, so I'm just going to reduce the number of objects to 3. Okay, so this is just the 3 objects that we're going to be using for the mesh import. Alright, now we're going to create a package file which is going to house these. So I'm going to hit Ctrl+P, and I'm going to select all the files from the extracted folder which we've just created. Just remember not to include the backup file that was created by X-Ray when we reduced the file counts. Alright, that looks correct. Click on the file name header column so that it sorts this in order. This is very important, or your package file will fail in game. And you click create package archive. Okay, I'm just going to call this Jared. You can call it whatever you want. Alright, the archive has been created successfully. Now I'm going to put this into a pack file. I'm going to use an EPK8 pack file, which has the slot number that I'm going to be assigning this to. I'm using slot 485. Right, if you're not certain how to add a wrestler to a new slot into a game, you can go and look at my tutorial on adding wrestlers to 2K19 as DLC. I posted a tutorial some time ago on my YouTube channel. Alright, so I'm going to open up a EPK8 pack file which I've created, 48502. I'm going to inject the package file which I've just created. Okay, and I'm going to now copy this into the game directory, and we're going to test this in game just to make sure the package file works. So I'm going to go into entrance, I'm going to select Jeff Jarrett, which is the slot I've created. Okay, and if we look at the model, it seems to render in game. There are bits missing, etc., but that's because of the CE and all of that. Alright, so we know that the package file is working, and we have 2 YObject files which are running in game. The textures look a bit weird because I've already created textures for the Jarrett TNA mesh. So these will be resolved when we import the mesh. Alright, so now that the package file has been created and we have a EPK8 pack file, and you've confirmed that it's working in game, we're going to start working on creating the mesh and splitting the different parts up to import this into your wrestler YObject file. Now it's important to do one step at a time when importing back into the game, and constantly take backups at each step of the way. That is because this process of importing custom meshes is something that's very complex to do, and there are multiple things which could cause a game to crash. So it's best to tweak one step at a time, confirm that it's working, take a backup of your pack file, and then thereafter take the next step. Alright, this will save you a lot of headache of trying and troubleshoot what has caused your game to crash if you are doing multiple things at the same time. Alright, so now we need to import the TNA mesh. Now I've already done this for you. If you're not certain how to do this, you hit run script and you use the ActorX importer script, which is created by Gildor. You can look at the uModel site and use the script that's provided there. Okay, one thing to note is that I set the roll value to 180 degrees when running the import, so that it aligns it to the WWE models. Otherwise the object is flipped. I'm not going to run the script because I've already imported the model. Alright, now when you import the model into 3D Studio Max, you'll notice that the pose of the model is different compared to the pose of the models for the WWE series of games. So if you look at the WWE games, I'm just going to load some of the objects. Okay, you'll see that the arms are in a different position, and the hands are in a different position, the head will be in a different position, etc. The easiest way to get this model in the same pose is to move the bones. Alright, I'll just hide this object so you can see what I mean. Okay, so the TNA mesh has imported a number of bones, and the mesh object is rigged to these bones. So if you move these bones around, you can get the model in the same pose. To give you an example, I've moved the bones and I've set an animation at keyframe 20 to get this in the same pose. So if I move this, you'll see the bones are moving, and the mesh will be aligned to the WWE 2K model. You have to move the bones manually. So the easiest way to do this is to make this see-through, and then load some of the other objects and then load the objects of the model that you're going to be importing into as a reference, so you can see where you need to position the TNA mesh, and then move your bones appropriately. Okay, so if I move this to keyframe 20, you can see these are aligned to the objects of Mojo Rolly, which are the arms which are in T-pose. Alright, so now that you have the model in the correct pose, you'll notice also that the traps of the model are very straight compared to the WWE models. You see that these have a more V shape to them. Okay, this is because they are rigging. The reason for this is because the WWE models have rigging on the sides as well, which control the movement of the traps. It is completely optional, but I like to shape the mesh to also have a V shape on the traps. This is because when you rig the model later on, you'll notice that the movement of the traps and the underarm looks a bit weird, because you'll notice that the movement of the traps and the underarm looks a bit weird. Okay, so the easiest way to do this is to select the object, select the vertices under the arms, and then move it around. Okay, so I've done this already to give you an idea. To further elaborate, I'll show you what I meant. So you select the objects that you need to move. I like to use a soft selection tool so it looks a bit smooth, and you can move this around to get the shape that you need, like so. Okay, so to save time, I've already done this. So you can see that this was the original model, and now this is a model with slightly wider trap shapes. Like I said, it's completely optional, it's up to you, but for me, I think it looks a lot better when the model is shaped like this and rigged to the WWE bones, so the arm movement and the trap movement looks a lot better, in my opinion. Alright, now that we have the model prepared, we need to start splitting the model up into different meshes which you can import into the different parts. Okay, so the easiest way to do this is to go into the element subdivision of the mesh. Okay, I'm going to select the head, and I'm going to say detach, and I'm going to detach this clone so that we don't mess up the original mesh and we have a separate object. Alright, I've already done this, so to save time, so I've got the left arm, I've got the head, I've got a torso, and I've got a right arm. Alright, those are 4 different objects. Okay, this is the default way in which the TNA meshes are split. Okay, let me just render the ears as well. Okay, now if you look at the WWE series of games, you'll notice that you notice that the WWE models have the area which is just below the neck and above the chest, which is called the clavicle, also attached to the head mesh. Alright, so you want to try and get this to look like it as well. So if I look at Mojo Rolly, you'll see that this has this area here which I'm referring to. Okay, the easiest way to do this is to go to the torso object, and then whilst you're on the torso object, select polygon, and then select the polygons that you want to separate. Okay, I normally compare this to the WWE mesh C more or less where I should do the split. Okay, so if I make the see-through, you can see more or less where they should be split. And if I go into the polygon sub-selection, I can make a selection which is relatively close to this. It doesn't have to be exactly to this. Alright, so I've selected these polygons, and then I'm going to detach these from the torso object. So I'm going to detach, and I'm going to deselect detach as clone, because we want to split the torso and the clavicle into two separate parts. Deselect clone, and you hit OK. Alright, so I've already done this, and I've called the object clavicle. Okay, so this is the object that's been split from the torso, and I also have a torso object which is without the clavicle. There. Alright. Okay, so now we want to combine the head object with the clavicle object, which we've just created. Also, let's remember to include the ears. Okay, so the way in which you want to do this is you want to try and create one single mesh out of the three objects that we've just created. You could select the element subdivision, and you could hit attach and attach the other two. This sometimes works, but sometimes it creates a separate smoothing group, and you'll notice that if you try and import this mesh into X-Ray with separate smoothing groups, only one of the meshes will be imported. So it may import the head, and it may not import the clavicle, or it may not import the ears, etc. So the best way in which to combine this is to select all three. Okay, you go into the utilities tab, and you select collapse. You ensure that the output type is mesh, and you want to collapse to a single object. Alright, I'm going to hit collapse selected, and this will create a single object for us. Alright, so now this is all a single object. Okay, you'll notice also that the element subdivision is still there. Alright, so now if you need to do any UV remapping, I would suggest you do this now before you proceed any further. Also remember that we're going to be creating separate textures for the head and the remainder of the body parts. So now, because you've taken the head object and you've taken the clavicle object, these are referencing two separate texture files. Whereas now we're going to be using a single texture file. So you will need to remap the UVs for all of the objects here. So you will need to remap the UVs to this object. If you apply the texture, you can see that I've already done the UV remapping. Okay, I'm not going to get into how to unwrap the UVs. That's a separate topic of discussion altogether. Okay, so now that your mesh has been prepared, you can export this as a NIF file. Alright, so your objects have been prepared and now are ready to be exported. You've done whatever UV remapping you wanted to do, etc. Alright, now you'll notice that if you take the polygon count and the vertex count on these models, these are much lower than the WW models because these are a much older game. Okay, so now you need to increase the vertex and polygon count to make the models look better in game. You can export them using the original polygon and vertex counts, but they are much lower resolution than the models in game and won't look as good. So there are multiple ways in which you can do this. You can use something like the mesh smooth modifier. Okay, and I like to select the classic or the quad output. You'll notice that if you select nums, the boundary of the object is also altered, and then you'll end up with gaps between the model. Okay, so I'm going to select classic. Now you can adjust the smoothness value to try and get the vertex and face count to a limit which is required by X-Ray. To explain what I mean, if you open up Mojo Rolly, you'll see that this has a vertex count of 3936 and you have a face tip count of 11722. Alright, so you need to try and get this object as close as you can to that face tip count and that vertex count, and then thereafter do an import. So you can do this by reducing the amount of smoothness that you have for each object. So I'm going to make this maybe 7.5, and I'm going to make this 0.75, which will reduce the amount of detail. And also you can run the multi-race tool just to check how much of vertices you have. You can see this is 2271, which is actually lower than what we want. So you can adjust the mesh mode value to a higher value to give it more detail, and then run the multi-race tool back and forth, etc. Okay, so the idea is that you want to try and get this as close as possible to the number of verts and the face strip count as you can, so you're getting as much detail as you can out of this model. Alright, so it's a process of going back and forth and trying to get the correct values here. I'm not going to go into detail on this again, because it's something that you need to go into trial and error. Okay, so once you have selected something to increase the polygon and mesh count, so I've used mesh mode. Like I said, there are other options. You can use tessellate as well, you can use turbo smooth, and you can also use subdivide to try and increase the number of polygons. Some of them work better for the head objects, some of them work better for the body objects, so you need to try different modifiers and see which one works best for you. Okay, so I'm going to stick with mesh mode, and then thereafter I'm going to select the normal modifier, because the normals need to be flipped. Okay, so you ensure that flip normals is selected and unify normals is not selected. Alright, and then you can export this into NIF format, and you can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it head sliced underscore tutorial just for now. And you need to select dark age of Camelot as the game, and then you need to ensure that generate strips is checked, normals is checked, update tangent space should not be checked because this will mess up the UVs, and then thereafter all of the other options for the skin modifier should be deselected. Alright, you hit export and it will create a NIF file for you. Okay, so I've already done this for all of the objects that we have here, just to speed up the process. Alright, now some users have reported to me that X-Ray is not importing UVs correctly when you do import for the second time. So I am fixing this in the X-Ray version 4.1, where it checks the UVs that are being imported and imports in the correct length. Okay, so let's open up our main Y object file. Okay, and we are going to import the Jarrett head into this. I'm going to ensure that import faces is turned on, and I'm going to hit the import button. Okay, I'm going to select head sliced. Okay, and you can see that the mesh has been imported. Alright, now as I said, we're going to be using the main Y object for the head and the secondary Y object for the body parts. If you try injecting the body parts into the body parts here, you'll find that the game crashes. So we're not going to use these at all. Okay, so let's open up the secondary Y object file, and let's import the body parts here. Also import faces on, and I'm going to select the appropriate objects. Okay, so the objects have been imported, and if you try this in game, you'll notice that the movement of the objects is completely messed up. The meshes look completely corrupt. That is because these objects have not been rigged as yet. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to apply rigging to these objects. Okay, so I'm going to export each of these objects. Okay, I'm going to do the same for the head. I'm just going to call the 0 head. Alright, and then thereafter I'm going to open up the original Mojo Roll UI object file in 3D Studio Max using the WWE2K18 PC exclusive Max file. Okay, this will open up the UI object with the correct bones and the rigging. Okay, and now I'm going to import all of the objects that we've just created into this. So let's do that. Okay, I'm going to select all of the objects. And I'm going to import all of these. I'm just going to call it object 0 body. Okay, so now we need to skin these objects so that they move correctly with the bones of the model. Okay, there are multiple ways in which you can skin the meshes, and I'm not an expert in rigging, but I'm going to show you the easiest way in which I figured out on how to do this. You may have a better method of doing it, and if you do, please share it in the comments below. Okay, so the method I use is I like to use the skinwrap modifier. So I'm going to select this arm object, and I'm going to select the skinwrap modifier. So skinwrap. Okay, so what the skinwrap does is that it tries to look at existing objects which are assigned to the skin object, and it tries to match the movement of your new object to the movement of the older objects. Alright, so the way in which we're going to do this is that we need to add which objects will affect the movement of this object. So I'm going to select the arm, the hand, the chest, the head, and also the opposing arm. The arms for some reason need the opposing arm to be set so that it doesn't glitch for some reason or the other. But generally I like to set the meshes which are touching this mesh, which affect the movement. Alright, I'm going to set the fall off value as low as I can, which is 0.001. I'm going to select the weight all points option, and then I'm going to select convert to skin. Okay, so this has now created a skin, and it has now rigged the arm to the model. Okay, and thereafter I'm going to select advanced parameters, and I'm going to ensure that the bone effect limit matches the weight count. In this instance our weight count is 7, so I'm going to specify 7. Okay, so now we are ready to export the weights from the skin. So I'm going to select scripting, run script, export bone weights to file. Okay, and I'm going to select, and I'm going to put this in the objects folder. I'm going to leave the name as object01.txt. Okay, I'm going to do the same for the other objects as well. The chest object, I'd like to select the arms, chest, and the head. Okay, I do not select the hands because the hands don't really affect the movement of the chest area. So in this instance I'm only selecting the meshes which are touching the chest. I also don't select the thighs object because it doesn't really control the movement of the chest object. Alright. Okay, so for the head object I like to select the original head, chest, arms, and also the hands, because the hand also controls the movement of the clavicle area, so it's a good idea to rig the hands as well. Alright, so I've exported the weights for each of the objects, so now it's time to import this back into X-Ray. So let's do that. Alright, so the weighting has been applied. Now, with the face object, you'll notice that if you try and use this in game, it will still distort even though we've applied the correct weights. And the reason for this is because the WWE series of games have separate meshes for each of the facial expressions for the head. And this is what causes the head object to look corrupt. For example, if I right click and I select load animations 2K18 upwards, this will load all of the animated meshes for the model. Okay, you'll notice that the animated meshes are causing this model to get corrupt. Okay, so I'm just going to export this, and I'm going to duplicate this object so that all the animated meshes have the same default pose and don't apply any facial animations. Okay, I'm just going to create a new folder called anim, and I'm going to export animation 0 into this. Alright, now that we have the folder anim with anim 0, I'm just going to rename this to anim underscore. I'm going to take out the 0, and I'm going to run a DOS command to make as many copies of this as I require. So I'm just going to run a command prompt in this location. Add, and this is the command that I would run, and this is the command that I would run. Okay, I'll just change this 112 to the number of animated meshes that I need. So in this instance it's 119, so I'll make this 119. Okay, and all this will do is just make a copy of the same object 119 times. But actually, come to think of it, I think I'm going to code a function to automate this in X-Ray soon. So you probably won't need to do the step, but I'm just showing you how to do it if you need to do it manually. I'm going to rename anim underscore to anim underscore 0 again, and I'm going to inject all of the animations in. Okay, I'm going to select the anim folder, and I'm going to hit select. Alright, so now the default animation has been applied to all the animation slots. So if you double click this, you'll notice that no animations are being applied. So this means that this model will have 0 facial animations in game. So if you want to apply facial animations in game, you will need to go and sculpt these manually using whatever sculpting tool you want, and inject the animations back into the model. Unfortunately, there isn't any automated way in which to do this, and this is probably the most time consuming process that you will need to follow. Okay, but I'm not going to get into detail on how to create the animated meshes. I've already done a tutorial on this for WWE 2K17, so you can go and look at those tutorials on how to create the animated meshes and import them back into the mesh. Alright, so our model now has been rigged correctly, and it also has no facial animations. Okay, the last thing that we need to do is that you'll notice now that we have chest and arm objects in the main wrestler object as well as the 001A. So we don't want these objects to be rendered in the main wrestler object, because we are using the body parts from the secondary wrestler object file. So the easiest way in which to do this is to change the shader. For some reason, if you set the shader of these objects to gear, it does not render in game. So I'm going to set the shader of these to gear, and it will make these invisible. Okay, I'm also going to make the shader of the head parameter gear. Even though you make this gear, for some reason the head still renders. But I'm making this a gear shader because in our secondary Y object file, the chest and the arm objects are also using the gear shader because we've replaced gear objects. If you set so if you set these shaders here to skin, these do not render at all. So unfortunately we have to use a gear shader to render the head, chest and arm objects. So I'm going to leave the shader in the secondary object file as gear. Alright, so we've imported the meshes, we've done the rigging, we've set the animations to neutral, and I've also set the shader of the chest and arm objects in the main object file to gear so that these do not render in game. So I think we are ready to inject these into the game. So let's try that. Right, now I'm going to load up our wrestler in game and let's see what it looks like. Okay, so you can see the head object, the arm and the chest are moving correctly. There doesn't appear to be any kind of glitches to it. You notice that the arms are not connecting to the hands, but you can go and fix these at a later stage if you want. Okay, so that's basically how you would import head, arm, and chest objects and any other body parts you want into the Y object file. Now, I'm not going to do the legs, I'm not going to do the hands, etc., because these are much lower poly counts than the WWE series of games. It takes a lot of time to rig these to the model, as you've just seen. So I actually don't import the legs and the feet and etc. of other models because I can easily use the ones that are in the WWE series of games and they look perfectly fine to me. However, the choice is yours. If you want to import the entire model, you can follow the process that I've detailed now and you can import the entire model piece by piece into the game. Okay, so if you wanted to create facial animations, I'll just detail this again quickly, even though I've done tutorials on this. The easiest way for me to is import the model into Modbox and go into the Layers tab and select the Sculpt option, and then thereafter create Sculpt layers above the main object. For instance, I've done animation 45, which is his mouth open, and I like to use Sculpt layers because you can adjust the strength, because sometimes you find that 2 or 3 animations use pretty much the same movement but with a different level of intensity. For instance, if I want the mouth to be only slightly closed, I can set this to 50 and it closes the mouth. Okay, so you can do the same for the eyes, etc. When I'm creating the facial animations, I don't create all 119 facial animations. I only create maybe 10 or 20, which I find to be useful. The ones that I like to create are the mouth open animations, the smiling, the frowning, and the animations where the wrestler is blinking, where the eyes are slightly open, slightly closed, completely closed, etc. For me, those 10 or 15 actually work fine. If you want to do all 119, you're welcome to do so, but as I said, it's a very time-consuming process. Okay, if you import these into the main wrestler Y object file, you'll notice that the wrestler will have animations in game. For instance, like this. If I import this model in game, we'll be able to open his mouth and close his mouth, etc. Alright, so now that we have our custom meshes imported back into the game, you can add the attire objects back and see if these work. Alright, and you can see the attire objects seem to work fine. You'll notice also that there's a slight gap between the chest and the head object, and I'm not certain what is causing this, but I think it's because we have the head mesh and the remainder of the body parts in 2 separate object files, and that's why there's a slight gap. So I've tried quite a few things to try and solve this problem using the skinwrap modifier, but I can't seem to come to a solution. So the only way in which I'm able to fix this is to actually move the vertices on the edges of the head and torso objects to slightly overlap, and this removes the gap between the objects. If you guys have another solution that works, you can let me know, but for me, moving the vertices solves this problem more or less. Alright, sometimes the attire objects also cause some weird display glitches, so you can also add the attire objects in the secondary Y-object file instead of the main Y-object file, and this sometimes solves your problem as well. So you have the flexibility to add the attire objects to whichever Y-object file you would like to do so. Alright, so that is the end of the tutorial, and I know this is a very complex tutorial, and I've spoken quite a bit at the beginning of the tutorial trying to explain the concepts, so I hope I didn't go on a bit too much, but it was a very complex tutorial to try and get through, and I wanted to try and make it as clear as possible. So I hope this tutorial has been helpful to you, and you are able to import your own custom meshes into the game. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to post it in the comments below. And if you have any other areas which you are not familiar with, which I've covered in the tutorial, I've detailed these in detail in the tutorials leading up to this. So I would really recommend you go and watch some of my other tutorials to get to grips with the fundamentals of modding the game. So that's it for me for this tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it, and until next time, happy modding. Take care. Bye.